one of the focuses we had this school year was to think about school climate, and more importantly, under that, looking at a couple of different areas. One of those areas is PBIS, which is a positive intervention system that's been in place at the middle school in years past. And so how could we take it from common areas and infuse it into the classrooms? And in addition to that, how could we look at traditional consequences and flip them so it's more of a restorative approach? So in the past at the middle school, we were looking holistically in common spaces. So how students were behaving in hallways, how are they behaving in the cafeteria, and so collectively in large groups, and we wanted to shift that focus to more of the classroom spaces. So the plan was to bring classroom teachers into the picture more in terms of how they were responding and working with students. So in the past, if a student was really struggling in a classroom, they may come out of that classroom and go to our Quiet Learning Center, where the dean of students or an administrator really work with that student and maybe sign an administrative detention if necessary. And so what is missing from all of that is for teachers to really work with the students who end up leaving their classrooms. So if I was a social studies teacher and I had a student removed from class, that student's making up that time and working with the dean of students or administrator versus spending the time with me so that we can restore what had happened in the classroom and get to a better place. So what we did is we got rid of that traditional term of detention. So there's no more lunch detentions, there's no more teacher detentions, but rather there's a teacher conference space that's available. So it's more reflective on both the student and teacher, and it involves having a conversation.
So that's almost like saying, we're not going to assume the child is the problem all the time, but that there is a problem that can be worked out.
Yeah, and it could be a problem that's existing within that classroom. It could be a problem that's existing outside of school that somehow made its way in.
That's right.
We like to refer to that as the invisible backpack. So if a student experienced a loss over the weekend, but we don't know about that, or the parent the parent had something difficult going on in their life over the weekend that impacted the students, they bring that with them, and it's invisible to us. It's not them coming without homework, but it may be them coming without homework, but also this kind of mental anxiety that's existing that for some reason can't leave their brain isn't impacting what they can do in academics. And so that can come out in lots of different ways.
It also makes the student feel valued, and it gives the teacher an opportunity to learn more about their students.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. So how do you do that?
So it's a lot of training, right? So guidance counselors, administration deans, and teachers are involved in, okay, so how can I do this process and do it well, and how can I get support? So we use our professional development time to look at that. We think about ways that we can strategize with students. Under the restorative practices, there's also something called circles, and circles are starting to be used more frequently in the building. So if a student was involved in, let's just say, a verbal altercation with another student, so they'll come to administrations or the deans, but they'll be involved in a circle conversation to restore the process. Circles feel safe to students, it's structured, it's organized. It's not just, okay, you get a detention for defiance and disruption, and then we don't address what happened.
Right.
Because that won't restore anything, and in fact, it can lead to other things happening later on.
So a circle like where you pass something around, it's my turn to talk.
Yeah, so the talking stick, direct connections to Native American culture and sitting in the circle and having a talking piece, and having it facilitated by an adult. Sometimes in those circles, students can bring an ally or a friend so they feel more comfortable, or a friend that may have been there as well and can see a different piece. We have all had those moments where you have your version of the truth, I have mine, and we can come to an agreement somewhere in the middle around how we can see eye to eye now, move forward, and still coexist. Our push is not that every student is going to be friends with every student, but our push is that every student needs to respect each other as humans and be able to build empathy and compassion. And you can't get that in the traditional sense of after-school detention where it's quiet, do work for 40 minutes and then go on and not address and get to the root of what's really happening.
And you're also giving the student a voice.
Absolutely.
Which is huge.
Yes.
And they can hear themselves grow and expand and learn about themselves and their own environment too.
Yeah, I mean, we have a job of not only getting kids academically intelligent, but also in terms of social and emotional intelligence and how they
had that for adults.
Yeah, it's all about being productive citizens and eventually productive teammates in a workforce, which is really important. And it's a hard job, and it's hard. When kids have those moments and your first inclination is I can't have them in that space anymore, but to be able to move past that and say, I want you here, we need to be able to make it work, what can we do? And that comes from conversation. And more importantly, at those conferences, there's goal setting. So it's not just a conversation, but it can be a process to set a goal and then have check-ins with those goals.
Do the students come up with the goals as well?
The students can start to come up with the goal themselves. The teachers can review their goal, can talk them through it, can make edits or tweaks. And if the student is really stuck, then the teacher can offer a suggestion for a goal.
That's awesome. So it's a new system. What does it take to implement something like that? Have we started doing that? Are we about to start? Okay.
So we've shifted from the idea of those traditional detentions to these conferences. We've shifted to having circles involved more frequently with guidance work and with administration responses. But it will be ongoing. There's lots of layers. One of the things that we've learned through restorative practices trainings that we've attended is that circles need to become a common feature of the school so that they can happen in different places. So circles can be in an academic setting as well. If you're having a class discussion on a particular topic, you can have guiding questions with kids in a circle with a talking stick so that the circles don't feel all of the time connected to disciplinary or behaviorally, but rather it's a part of our school setting. We can also get at it through advisories if we have discussions on current events or things that are going on in our community. Dialogue circles can be implemented with that as well. And that helps support the idea of a restorative circle. So there's different layers of circles that can exist within a school.
So the community talks about, the disparities in discipline, and that was one of the problems before. How does restorative justice impact that issue?
Yeah,
if at
so
all?
right, and I think that's a national conversation, and I think of it not just in terms of race or ethnicity. I think about it in terms of how it impacts academic setting in general. So we have an obligation to get our students prepared to be successful high school students. And while we don't want standardized testing to dominate our lives, it is an important facet of our lives and of our students. And it has a high impact, especially when they go to high school. And so if we think about traditionally, a student gets into a fight at school and we send them home for 3 to 5 days. They've now lost 5 days of classroom instruction. We can say that we can send work packets home and it feels like they're not missing class, but what they're missing is the direct instruction and support of a licensed teacher in front of them. And so we have to think differently. When a student leaves school for 5 days, for instance, what do we gain by doing that? So in other words, the student is removed and it's a harsh consequence, but when they come back, there's no real debriefing with the student as to what happened and why it happened. And how are they not going to repeat the same behavior the next time they're faced with a similar situation?
Academic and a social impact.
Absolutely, because you want to get to the point where kids aren't having those moments in schools, but you can't get at that if you don't keep them and work with them while they're there. So the way that restorative practices has worked is that you want to keep students in school. It doesn't mean that maybe they're going to be able to go right back to class, but rather if they're removed and in what we have as a quiet learning center, while they're there, receiving educational support, they're also receiving social and emotional support. So they can build their own toolbox of how we can respond in different ways. Because really, we know, and there's a lot of research out there right now that talks about brain development, and that really until you're in your early 20s, your brains aren't fully developed. And so a 13-year-old being faced with a lot of struggles and anxiety and things going on, they respond very quickly to things, and they're less likely to think before they react and think things all the way through. They're less likely to have their filters in place when they're responding. And so we have to teach them about that and help them to reflect. If they're away from us, we can't do that work.
That's right.
It's the human connection that needs to happen in the midst of really wanting to provide a quality, rigorous education at the same time.
Right.
And I think every teacher would agree that if you don't have a strong school culture or a strong classroom culture, the place that you really want to take students, that challenge, that rigor, the idea of developing grit in your students won't be able to exist because they don't feel safe in the spaces. And that could be a safety for a number of different reasons. And you have to work hard at building that in order to get kids to exactly where you want them to be academically.
Right.
And every human that walks through our paths has a different story. And we're trying to blend them together and make them work respectfully and collaboratively together. It's not a machine that we set up to flip products out to us. That doesn't have feelings, that doesn't have emotions, that doesn't have hormones that are changing on a daily basis. No, I mean, I think it's good work that we're doing, and it's the right place to go. But it's also important to note that change is always hard. And so we have to find ways that we can be really supportive of adults and students in the building, because it's hard for kids, an 11 or 12-year-old, to kind of say what's going on and to to talk about and reflect how they can get better versus blaming it on somebody else.
Yep.
You know, so they can blame maybe an action that they had received, but they can't blame how they reacted to that.
Yeah.
And so they have to own, why did they react that way? How could they choose a different reaction the next time? And, you know, and the same with adults, and to be able to get places to support kids hearing that and being able to process it.
And it helps both to know the difference.
Absolutely.
That's
And it's
huge.
exciting change. I mean, that's the thing. And it's never going to happen in a year, but it needs to be built in and ongoing.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marissa.
Oh, thank you.
Great job. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Yeah.